help to expand the size of GDP overall after the recession. That, I think, is something hopefully that the countries will do during this recession.
Thank you. Mei Wei. And by the way, we would love to hear from you guys, so please, if you can take a pencil and write your questions on the paper provided, we'd love to hear from you. Mei Wei, can you talk to us a little bit about the unemployed workers? Cheng Li in the previous panel mentioned 20 million people unemployed. You, in some ways, have dealt with a lot of workers. What is the sense of, from the, your contact with the workers? You don't have direct necessary contact, but what is your sense of the pulse?
I think the unemployment are fairly focused in two provinces, the Zhejiang province and the Guangdong province, primarily because they are where the export machines and all the investment for export takes place. In Guangdong province, mostly are investors from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and other parts of Asia. They come in, they set up the plant, and they export toys and handbags and shoes and so forth. They have been impacted severely, so there's severe unemployment there. Zhejiang province, similar export-oriented, but mostly private enterprise, Chinese entrepreneurs, and they have also been impacted. But they're also a lot more nimble and flexible, so they're able to switch to other products for export, but they have been severely impacted. But in terms of the state-owned enterprise, in terms of a large multinational like ours, we haven't had any unemployment. We have looked at taking down the bonuses, reduce salaries, and other ways to avoid unemployment because the government is very concerned about the social stability which unemployment will create. But right now it's been pretty much localized in those two provinces, and there's a lot of unrest there. But generally, I think for the large companies, we're utilizing the different ways to avoid laying people off.
When you say unrest, I mean a lot of the workers come from the countryside, they can just go back to their land. What is the real risk for some real unrest?
Well, the unrest, if you have a large enterprise such as SOE, which have, for example, 100,000 employees working for them in the northeast part of China, if they go bankrupt and they close the door, you're going to have 100,000 employees on the street. And that will be very tough to contain if they're looking for their payments and they're looking for the security of their jobs. I think that would create a challenge for the government.
And so far, there aren't any signs of the real challenge, that kind of real challenge to the government?
Well, there's a lot of symptoms in those provinces I mentioned, but I think so far they've been managed. For example, in Chongqing, where we have a huge plant, the taxi driver went on the strike, and they stopped the traffic, and then Party Secretary Bo Xilai came out, met with them, and negotiated with them, and then resolved the issue. So there's a lot of those specific, unique, localized issues that the government will continue to address. And the government have come out basically to the SOEs to say, try to take all actions other than laying people off to avoid that.
Okay. Ya-Qin, I'd like to ask you the next question, but please, anyone else can jump in too, because it's about a topic not in your area, but about the financial relationship between the U.S. and China. So clearly, what this great recession has underscored is that we have a very wealthy nation, the U.S., being financed by a government that is extremely wealthy, but has a lot of poor people in the country. So China is basically taking its wealth from the poor. I mean, China has a savings rate of about 50%, but so much of it is from the government. And taking it instead of, raising the people from poverty in China, and basically passing it on to Americans who then can buy their third homes in Florida. What do you think about this? How do people in China feel about this?
Well, if you look at the key factors that fuel the economic growth in the United States in the last 30 years, right? First is innovation. The second is globalization. And the third is indeed actually excessive debt. It's spend the money you don't have, and a lot of those come from countries, poor countries like China. I think this is a little bit mixed. Most people probably don't even know, right? China is funding United States, is funding the second, the third, and the houses in Florida. But if you look at the overall, the portfolio of investment, and I just look at the United States, the Treasury remained probably the best investment for China. And actually, that's one of the reasons actually China was able to really come through this recession in much better shape than any other countries. Because you look at the financial system, it's very healthy. It's largely insulated from the rest of the world. And much of the investment is in the US dollars and the US Treasury, and actually has remained pretty strong in the last 6 months, last year or so. Imagine if China put a lot of investment in euros or other currency, it would be very, very different. So let me just add a little bit on the stimulus package. In fact, China, what the U.S. can learn from the stimulus package, how China implement this whole thing. For those of you who don't know, there's a 4 trillion renminbi in the entire stimulus package. And I was saying that China is pretty good in terms of coming up with a centralized planned mechanism and making sure it's executed in a way that is efficient and straightforward. If you look at this whole package, there are several components. And one of this is the basic infrastructure, building railways, high-speed railways. And the other part is, other parts are healthcare. I was with some of the hospital CEOs last weekend, and there's it's about $850 billion in the overall healthcare. And if you look at China in the last 30 years, there are a lot of excitement, but there are two things really lag behind. One is healthcare, and one is education. Right, so I think this whole thing is going to change the infrastructure and really benefit China in the long term. One thing I criticize in this whole package is the lack of investment in basic research, in science and technology. There's a little bit on the innovation side, but overall, the percentage is very small. Right? I think if you look at the whole thing, it's very much focused on the basic infrastructure, focus on supplying jobs for those who are unemployed. So I keep telling the Chinese government, the officials, that put more in education, put more in basic science, in research.
There's no lobbying effort in China to get more money into R&D?
There's a lot of different voices. And we don't do any lobbying in China.
No, I agree with you on healthcare. My brother once spent an internship a few months in a hospital in Beijing. He's an ophthalmologist, so he was sitting in on some of the operations. It was the summer and very hot, and so as they were operating on people's eyes, the windows were open because it was so hot. So they have a lot to go. To get a little bit back to the idea of how the Chinese feel about the financial relationship with the U.S., I don't know, perhaps Kai-Fu, you can comment, or anyone else, please. There have been some efforts by the Chinese to buy assets abroad. Okay, so we had the Sinuk effort to buy Unicall, we had Haier's effort to buy Maytag in 2005, and then the CIC was successful in putting $3 billion into Blackstone, $5 billion into Morgan Stanley, and look what happened. What do the Chinese feel about this? Are they angry? This must be in the news, and are they resentful that they've sort of had bad experiences?
Well, I think a lot of the Chinese are losing a lot of money in their own domestic stock markets. So I think they understand investments can be risky. So I haven't heard any complaints about such things. I think there are questions about what assets they would be permitted to buy, given the potential protectionism around high tech and various things. But I don't see a lot of discussion or complaints about that.
Okay. I heard that CIC got a little bit of criticism for its investments, but that is to be expected.
The reality is, no doubt they lost money in Blackstone, but if they put their money at the same period of time in almost any other thing, they probably would have lost a lot more. So it's really understandable. What concerns me is that CDC would then, that the China Investment Corporation would then get too gun shy, and hence miss the greatest opportunity to buy further assets and the strategic assets in the rest of the world.
But I think at least last